That was 60 seconds. I don't know about you, but I was uncomfortable. Were any of you uncomfortable? Were a few of you getting restless? What's going on? Like, why is she just standing there looking at us? Like, did she forget? Is she nervous? Like, what's happening? We hate waiting. We really, really don't like waiting. When I used to work in IT, I was working in IT all the way through COVID, and we're doing a lot of Zoom calls. And I would often argue with my colleagues about what's the appropriate length of time that you're supposed to wait on a call for somebody else to show up before you can hang up. And it's interesting because people will be like, oh, they're wasting my time. I can't believe I have to wait for this person. I've sacrificed this time, and don't they appreciate the value of my time? And, even though you're just seeing a computer, and chances are you can have a seconds window open and you can be doing something else. It's not like you're just sitting there doing nothing, and yet we don't like it. We don't like to be made to wait. I was thinking about places and times where we wait. And nowadays we live in such a quick world that really the only place I go where I really have to wait a long time is maybe the doctor's surgery, right? Like everything else, you have an appointment, you get there, you go in, maybe you're 5 minutes late. But sometimes doctors can run like an hour behind, and you're just sitting there and you're waiting and you're getting irritated. Have you ever walked out because a queue's too long or because you're too frustrated? And I hate waiting so much that I am often late for things because I hate waiting. So I hate being early because if I'm early, I have to wait. And so I schedule my trip so that I arrive on time. And then if anything goes wrong, I've got no buffer, right? But because I hate waiting, I hate getting there and then going, I could have been doing something else. And do we have any online shoppers amongst us here? Any online shoppers? Okay. Right. Well, it was Black Friday yesterday. I don't know if any of you got some good deals. I'd just like to say 1, 2, 3. 57% of you would have closed the window if you have to wait 3 seconds for a page to load. You ever had that experience? You've clicked on something and it just takes ages and you're like, nah, go back, next, find something else, right? We live in a world where everything is instant and where it has to be instant because otherwise we get bored, because otherwise we get distracted. 57% of you will close a browser window or hit back if a page takes 3 seconds. 3 seconds is nothing. And yet this is like the instant world that we have become part of. Speaking of the internet, as I was doing some research for this, I found this quite amazing stat. And it's a slight tangent, but I just found it so fascinating I had to share it with you. You know that progress bar or the spinny wheel when a page is loading? It's not actually reflecting how fast the transfer is actually going on. They've fixed it so that you feel better about the waiting time. So they set you up with an unrealistic time frame at the beginning and then they speed it up. So it goes, this download's going to take 5 minutes. And then suddenly it says 2 minutes. And then suddenly it says 30 seconds. And you think, yes, my computer's doing well. And so this is like, so it's manipulating you into coping with the waiting time. And I found that like really, really interesting. As I was looking at waiting, I came across this book, Delayed Response by Professor Jason Farman from the University of Maryland. So his quote here, unlike time as it is experienced when we're being productive or while enjoying an activity, waiting is noticed. We notice the time. We don't notice the time when we're busy doing other things. Waiting becomes obvious. We feel uncomfortable, uncertain, anxious. Now, I'm wondering if you're watching this online, how many of you guys hit the plus 15 seconds button on your YouTube while I was standing there for that 60 seconds at the start? Maybe you checked your sound and was like, oh, maybe something's wrong. Oh, no, hang on, her lips aren't moving. Like maybe you checked your computer. Is something going wrong? We can't cope with just waiting for 1 minute. We're always in such a hurry. Here's an excerpt from the book here. This comes from a review. Farman explores how modern technology, especially digital communications, have reshaped our expectations around response times. In an age of instant messaging and near instant gratification, waiting has become an emotionally charged experience. The book delves into how delays in responses, whether from friends, family, or colleagues, can create anxiety, impatience, and frustration, and how people often measure their self-worth and social value by the speed of the responses they receive. Before the digital age, waiting was slower and more predictable. If you wanted to hear from someone, you sent a letter and then you had to wait. And waiting wasn't stressful back then. You didn't constantly wonder if someone had seen your message or hit refresh on your inbox every 5 minutes. You just waited. And that gave you time to reflect and to live life in the meantime. Also, there was no pressure as soon as you got a message to, I have to respond immediately. Because you knew that waiting was just part of the process. Today, though, the constant demand for instant responses has changed how we experience waiting. We've become so used to instant communication that changed how we experience wait. I've lost my place. Great. Let's skip that. And the emotional distance has changed too. In the past, waiting didn't seem so personal. You were separated by time and space, and there wasn't the same expectation to be constantly available. Now, digital communication makes us feel like we should always be connected. And if we're not getting quick replies, we feel like something is wrong. But Farman's point is that we need to reflect and rethink on how we wait. Instead of letting delays cause frustration, we could use that time to reflect, to be patient, and to maybe even learn something new about ourselves. Okay, so why are we talking about waiting? And why did we watch a video about the book of Numbers? Well, we are, as you know, in the middle of a Moses series, and it was actually quite hard for Fraser, Jared, and I, as we sat down to map out this series, to pick out the stories and the incidences that we would cover and limit it to only 10, which is the length of this series. Simply because there are so many things that happen. The story of Moses covers 4 books in the Bible, and they're 4 big chunky books: Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They're not little books that you can read in 5 minutes, right? And so there's so many things that happen in there. And why I showed you the whole video of Numbers is because I wanted to give you the big picture of what is happening in the book of Numbers, because there's so many stories in there and we don't have time to get into it all. Of course, Moses is born in the book of Exodus, and there's lots of adventures there: Egypt, the plagues, the Red Sea, Sinai, the golden calf. There's thousands of stories in Exodus. And then in Leviticus, Fraser talked about that one a couple of weeks ago. We looked at the temple and the ceremonies and the structures around the book of Leviticus that might seem a bit dry and boring today, but it's actually God's way of connecting a broken people with a perfect God. And then we get to the book of Numbers, and it's a. Let's see. Right. Now, this is the picture that we ended up with. Now, I realize this is probably too small for you to see, but it gives you the structure of the book, the 3 locations that this story happens in, and then also these 2 times of travel that happen that break up the story. And the center of the book there, as you can see, is this first attempt to enter Canaan. Now, that was the original plan, remember. The original plan was that they come out of Egypt, they spend a year at Mount Sinai, like figuring out who God is and where they're going to go and the people they're going to be. And then they were going to go and enter Canaan. That was the plan. And imagine during those 40 days of wait, when the spies are out scouting the land, imagine being an Israelite in that time, how you would feel. You'd be a bit nervous, you'd be a bit excited, you'd be like, this is the culmination of all of our hopes and dreams and this huge epic journey that we've had that's taken a year. I don't know how you would feel if you were there and you were waiting for those 40 days. But then the spies come back, and as we saw in the video, things happened. They did not just say, yes, that's great. God's led us this far. We have confidence. Let's just go in. They went, hang on, guys. There's giants there. There's huge armies. There's big walled cities. They're so much stronger than us. We can't cope with this. We can't do this. We're going back to Egypt. Imagine the emotions that's going on in that instance. They don't get to go in. They say they don't want to go in. And so God says, okay, I'll give you what you asked for. See, this punishment of waiting in the desert for another 40 years, it's what they asked for. It's not God being mean. It's God giving them what they asked for. And then there's this story where they say, okay, God, no, we recognize that we don't want to wander in the desert for 40 years. We'll go in after all. Don't worry. We'll go in. We'll conquer them. And they run off by themselves to try and conquer Canaan. And they suffer massacre and annihilation. And it's an awful story. And so then we have the story that Dr. Wendy looked at last week, which is the rebellion of Korah in Numbers chapter 16. I meant to zoom in on this bit. Okay, so you've got the spies exploring, and then you've got the rebellion of Korah there, which we looked at last week. And it's one of the hardest stories in the Bible. And we thought, do we drill into this story? Do we want to point out the fact that these people were died in such a graphic way? But Dr. Wendy looked at that story last week. But what about Moses? What did Moses do? Well, the Korah story makes Moses look really good, actually, because if you remember from last week, every time the people rebel, it says Moses falls on his face before God and he cries out to God and he prays for deliverance and he says, God, please save me, save the people, don't destroy the people, show your mercy, remember your covenant. And Moses looks like this kind of almost God-like figure in the story where he's interceding for the people, where he's stepping out, where he's being the person who's connecting the people with God. But then as we can see, as the story continues, the next story that happens is that Moses fails too. Moses isn't a God-like figure who's perfect, who gets everything right. Suddenly, Moses loses his temper too, and he goes, I've had it with you people, and he smashes a rock. And suddenly God goes, you know what? You're just as bad as the rest of them. Your heart is still sinful. You can't go into the promised land either. Now, I want you to just stop and think about that for a second. You're an Israelite. You've gone through this journey out of Egypt. You've been at Sinai for a year. You're ready to enter the promised land and everything goes wrong. And you're suddenly told, back in the wilderness for the next 40 years, oh, and by the way, if you're aged over 20, you're going to die out there. What do you do? What do you do when you're stuck in the wilderness point of your life? You know, the book of Numbers is called Numbers in English because it starts with the census and all the numbers of the people. But in Hebrew, the book is called Bar Midbar, which literally means in the wilderness. And the whole point of the book is to tell the story about what happens in the wilderness. And I think we've all been there. I think we've all had moments in our lives where we're stuck in the wilderness, where we're stuck with waiting, where we don't exactly know where we're going or what we're doing or how life will pan out. You know, I was going to dig into the Moses failure, how in his moment of waiting, he finally fails. I thought that was the point of this story, and I thought that was what I was going to talk about. But as I was thinking and praying and looking at this story, I realized that the point is not the failure. Because guess what? All of us fail when we're in the wilderness. All of us have moments of struggle. All of us are human and we sin. But here in the story, what I can't get over is what God is doing. See, here they all are. Oh, I forgot I had that slide. It's amazing what they can do with AI pictures these days. It almost looks like the tents will have electricity, doesn't it? Anyway, so they're sitting there and they're waiting and they're waiting. But what is God doing while they're waiting? I want to zoom in on this last part of the story here. Here you have Moses rebelling here, chapter 20, where he says, you rebels, must we bring water out of the rock? He's saying, it's me, guys. It's me that's got you this far. He's forgetting his dependence on God. But meanwhile, while the people in their waiting, in their wilderness, in their desert, are going through all the problems and the arguments and the complaining, what is God doing? There on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got the story of Balaam. And I've always been distracted by the donkey. Whenever we think about Balaam, we think about the talking donkey, right? I mean, that's the cool part of the Balaam story. Like, it becomes a cool children's story that let's talk about the talking donkey. And we missed the point of the story. It reminded me of, I don't know if you've been to this church a long time, you might remember that I preached on Jonah a few years ago. And we get distracted by the whale because we think the whale is cool. And yet that's not the point of the story of Jonah. And the story of Balaam, the point is not a talking donkey. You've got Balaam is a pagan sorcerer. He's not a prophet of God. He's a pagan, like witch doctor, for want of a better word. And he's been paid money by the enemy king to come and curse the Israelites. You know, the enemy king has gone, let's destroy these people. Let's go and they're a threat to us. They're down there in the valley and they're saying all their negative things. And yet up there on the mountain, blessing is being spoken over them. Up there on the mountain, God is pouring down his grace on a people that do not deserve it. And they have no idea that it's going on. They don't look up and go, oh yeah, there's Balaam the sorcerer trying to curse us. They don't know at the time. But up there, God is pouring his grace. He's pouring his love on a people who are lost in their waiting. I don't know where you are. All of us need to learn to wait better. But I do want to leave you with this image. If you're in the valley, discontented at God, I forgot the text. I forgot about the slides. Sorry, guys. This is one of the things that Balaam says, which I think is so cool. Remember, he's a pagan sorcerer. He says, God is not human that he should lie, not a human being that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? I have received a command to bless. He has blessed and I cannot change it. I love that. He's trying to curse them and he's saying, I can't. And he's telling the king, this is who God is. God doesn't change his mind. God has made promises. God has made a covenant. He promises to bless these people. And here again, this is also from Balaam's words in Numbers chapter 23. No misfortune is seen in Jacob, no misery observed in Israel. The Lord their God is with them. The shout of the king is among them. Now, I think that's really funny because actually, if you look at what the Israelites are doing at exactly this time, is they're whinging and they're complaining, right? And yet, the pagan king and the pagan sorcerer, they're saying, no misfortune, no misery. God is blessing them. They can't even see the blessings. They're down there murmuring and complaining, and yet they're being pronounced blessing over them. So I want to leave you with this image. You're in the valley, discontented at God, hating the waiting, angry and frustrated. But I'm here to remind you today that you are God's chosen son. You are God's chosen daughter. You are loved immeasurably by God. And at that moment of your frustration, there's God on the mountain causing your enemy to call down blessings on you, because that is the kind of God that he is. David put it beautifully in Psalm chapter 27, where he says, I remain confident in this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And so David encourages us, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. All of us go through wilderness times in our lives, times where we're waiting, times where we're caught in the valley. But as I invite the band to come up and join us, I asked them specifically to play this last song that we're going to sing now because of the second verse. Because in the second verse, it talks about praising God even in the wilderness times of our lives, in the waiting. Verse 2 says, "Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place, though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name." And I just want to invite you to join us as we sing these words of hope and faith in a God who blesses us even in the waiting times of our lives. Amen.